All right, hello everybody. If you haven't seen part one, this is part two in a series of videos that I'm doing for um, making a music site out of React. This is aimed at people who've really never seen React before. You'll still probably want to watch part one where I explain what the tools I'm using are and the basics of um, how um, JavaScript and HTML come together to make the website. Um, Last time I got to the point where I could run a server, or I'm sorry, start a web server on my system to display the page that I've made. So by running this npm start, all of the JavaScript code, images, HTML, CSS that make up the page will all be bundled together, hosted on my computer temporarily for me to debug, and it'll pop open a Chrome window so I can take a look at what it looks like. I can actually leave this up as I'm working, and any changes that are made to the JavaScript will be rebundled immediately, and that often means that I can just see my changes in the website without having to reload the page or anything, which is pretty nice. What I want to do this time around is make use of what I've started from last time. Last time I made all of these buttons up here. Well, they're really not even buttons, they're just images. These images aren't doing anything yet. They are just kind of looking like they might turn into a music player one day. So one thing I want to do is make my buttons interactive, make them do something. But before I can do that, well, I need them to have something to interact with. So I'm going to try to get data off of this server. I want to populate a list of music tracks and be able to scroll through them. So that's my first goal. So the first thing I want to do is let's start by making a list of music tracks. I'm not going to be loading them from the server in any fancy way. I'm going to include a list of songs that I've already compiled from a different project I did a while ago. So I'm going to go find that. You can see I've got all these other projects that I've worked on. And one of those is sitting in... I believe it's in this was MusicBot. Yes, pl.json. This is my playlist, and it's stored in a JSON file format. JSON is short for JavaScript Object Notation. And the file is more or less arranged in the same way that you would compose a JavaScript object. If I take a peek at this object, let me use a Visual Studio here to do that. Here's my playlist.json. You can see I've got a bunch of objects nested inside of objects with arrays. There's way too many objects in here for one. I don't know why I have this many layers of nesting. They're pointless. Playlist only contains one thing called track list. Track list only contains one thing called track. So really, these things are redundant. I'm just going to make them go away for now. Assume that they don't exist. I'm just going to select everything and Shift Tab. There we go. So the data in this file contains a bunch of music tracks. I have their titles, where on my computer they're stored. This is actually going to be a URL, but for now it's just a link to somewhere else on my computer. Custom ID, which is part of a feature that doesn't actually do anything anymore. I think pretty much all these custom IDs are empty. Yup. So those can go away. And creator, which really should be author or artist. But you know, this is a good enough starting place. So I'm going to start by making my music playlist object. Remember, this music playlist object is the thing right now that contains just a string that says this will be a music playlist. If we look at the page, it's this thing right here. It's going to have to contain a list of those songs. So first, let me get those songs loaded into memory. I'm going to import that file. I'm going to call it playlist. Up. Can I just do like playlist.json? No, I guess I do have to do it like this. pl.json. This dot means this folder. You can see I'm loading all of these images from this folder, which the public folder counts as being as this folder. So this will be available. Now I need to do something with this. If we look back at the structure at pl.json, it is an object, and it's got one property called track in it, which is an array. So I want to interact with this track property. So if I wanted to do that, I'm going to do that here. Playlist.track. So this is my list of tracks. This was named bad. This is named better. I can actually just change the name while I'm thinking about it. Aha. So now I have an array. What can I do with this array? Well, what I want is for each track in this list to be its own element on the screen. So let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. If I go to my old website that did the same, that basically is the site that I'm trying to replace with this work, you can see I've got multiple items in view here. It's a list that scrolls up and down. This is more or less what I'm trying to recreate. Every track should be its own item in this list. So that's what I'm going to make. Well, I guess we should talk about real quick lists in JavaScript. If I were to inspect this, I could see what this this structure looks like. If you see, if I highlight my mouse over these things, you can see what element they correspond to. What I've got here, which you can see it highlights pretty much the whole screen, all of the playlist, this is a UL tag. That is short for unordered list. And then everything inside of here is a list item. So I want to mimic this behavior. I'm going to make an unordered list. I'm going to get rid of my temporary label because we're going to be replacing it with something less temporary. And we're going to have a bunch of list items in here. So, you know, if I put, maybe I put my temporary label here in this list item just so we can see what that looks like. And we'll put it a bunch of times. If I look back at my site, it says it can't find the JSON file, and then I get really sad. I thought I would be clever. I guess I need to put this inside of the source folder. There we go. Aha! This will be a music playlist. It says it 5 times. So, well, now I got these annoying little bullet points. I want to make these go away. And the way you can do that is with CSS, so, you know, style tags. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what that looks like. I'm going to cheat a little. I'm going to go ahead and look at my other site. I still have the developer tools up here, and you can see on the list item, it's got list style type set to none. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here as well. And for the time being, I'm just going to apply this rule to every single list item in the entire site, because I don't need them. If I go back to the site, cool, no bullet points. I also would like to make them kind of like shift over so they're not all the way out here in the middle of nowhere. I've got the developer tools open for this site. Please, I don't need the console open right now. You can see as I highlight them over them, they are not even coming all the way over here. That's really bothering me. Here, if I hover my mouse over the unordered list, you can see it's highlighted this area on the left side in green. This is, I believe it is padding. So, yeah, I want to set my padding to 0 for UL. I'll put that right above list item. That feels a lot better. It's also got, I think it's also got margins above and below. That's also bothering me, so I'm going to get rid of those too. I'm going to put it above. I try to... I should only have to put the margin on the whole list, because that's the unordered list was the thing that had the margins. I like to put them in alphabetical order, just helps me read them better. So the way that margin works, I don't have to put top and bottom, because if you put a single value for margin, it'll assign this value to top, bottom, left, and right. And what I can do is I can put 2 values, and one of them is for top, bottom, and the second one is, I think it's first one is top, bottom, and the second one is left, right, but I could have that backwards. or you can put 4 values, and I think it's like top, bottom, left, right. So I could just be like this, and then we could save it, and then we could see if I was right about top. So oh, those need to be in pixels. PX. Don't forget your units. So, yep, 1, 2, 3. Top has 0. I think bottom has 1. Right has 2, and left has 3. So top, bottom, right, left. Top, right, bottom, left. Okay, it's like clockwise. Okay. But that's not what I want, so that's going to go away. Back to 0. Okay. So that's cool, but I actually want to populate these with like real music track names. So what can I... Yeah, this should go away. What can I say? Well, I know that if I've got an array and I want to do something once for each one of these, I'm going to have to go through a loop, right? So I'm going to... Should I do it the complicated way first, or should I do it the blah 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 words things? I'm having a hard time forming a sentence. So what I'm going to probably do here is I'm going to loop through tracks right here inside of this return statement. This is very weird to look at, but is gonna help me in the long run. What map does is it, for every element in an array, will generate a new value. So I can say, for example, if my elements, let's say we represent the elements with the word element. Let's say I just want the name of the track. So actually, this is an array of tracks. So why don't we call an individual track a track? And track has, I think we call a name in it. pl.json title. It's called title. I'm glad I checked. Title. So this should give us an array that has titles in it. Now I'm forgetting off the top of my head how to turn that into a bunch of list items. So why don't I go look out on the internet? Well, that's looking pretty good, actually. Let's run with it. So instead of just mapping to track.title, why don't I just shove them in a list item? Almost. I need to put these curly braces around for it to be treated like a JavaScript expression. Way better. So yeah, let me break this down again. We want to write a JavaScript expression, like a normal JavaScript expression. These things here, these JavaScript, these HTML-looking tags, these are using a JavaScript library called JSX, whose entire job is to make it so that we can write JavaScript, and basically write in an HTML form if you remember up here, we were creating these components like max volume button, but then we were including them in these tags as if those tags were HTML tags. That's what JSX lets us do. But as we're in the middle of building a music playlist, you know, we want to make a container, so that's a div, and then we want to put our unordered list inside of it, and then we want to put a bunch of list items. We need to break away from the JSX syntax, like these tags, and go back to a more traditional JavaScript language. So you use these curly braces to do that. Everything inside these curly braces will be treated as normal JavaScript until it encounters a tag like this. So I wanted these things to map to list items, but then each list item I need to shove a JavaScript, you know, the value of a JavaScript variable into them. So I use the curly braces again. Why don't I show you what that produces? So I've got a list item, and then a track title, and then a closing list item. List item, track title, closing list item. These should match the same order as the tracks I have in this list. Track title, track title, track title. 0, 2, 3, 4. 0, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can count. I swear I can count. So I'm pretty happy with that. But the problem is that this playlist file is, well, it's like a static piece of data. If I wanted to add songs to this list, I'd have to have access to this file and hand key them in. And that's just not going to work for me in the long run. So what I want to do is basically store this information in a database and get that information from the database. So I actually need at least a two-tiered application here. Our first tier is going to be the client side, and the second tier will be our application layer, which could have a database sitting beside it on the same machine. That's what I'm going to start with. I'm actually going to start without a database entirely. I'm just going to put a server, application server, that's going to grab this file and wait for the client to ask for it. Because later, when I'm ready to use a database, I can just make it so rather than the server getting it from a flat file, the server gets it from a database instead, and I won't have to change the client code at all. So let's get rid of that. Now this is going to break because it has no idea what playlist is. I'm going to have to introduce some new concepts here. So bear with me. This is going to get pretty dense pretty quick. When you create these React components like music playlist, they have a few inherent qualities to them. They have a list of properties that are passed in by their parents. They have state, which is data that it itself manages. Right now, this music playlist has neither of those things. If I wanted to pass a property in, I would have to do it like this. It's kind of like passing in properties in traditional HTML. So like in HTML, you might have a div with a style tag, right? And then you'd put your style information here, like display block, which just means it sits there and takes up a block of the screen. Or maybe instead I want like background color red. if I did this and looked over at my site, you can see it still is unhappy because I don't have tracks. Let me comment this out. Oh, what's this in like color or in quotes? Ah, there we go. So this is a property of the div. But what happens if I put a property on something like music playlist? Like anything. I want to make something up like value equals hello world. Music playlist will then have this properties object, and I could use that here. Let's say I want a single list item. Whose value was props.value. Oh, I forgot to put the curly braces again. Ah, there we go. Hello world. So things that are nested inside the tag like this are my properties. I could name this anything I wanted, so my prop. And then I have to change it here as well. If I wanted to read it, I would have to match the name. And yeah, you can see I've got hello world here. So that's one thing that one type of data that React component can hold on to. The other type of data is a state object. So let's say I want my component to remember something, like why don't I, well, I'm just gonna, well, what do I want to remember? I'll just do a basic example and say we'll remember a number, a count, or maybe the time. We'll remember the time. So if I were to, that was a good example too. If I wanted to put the current time, I could do so by just kind of shoving a date.now in here. This is a JavaScript function. It gets the current time, and it should display it in a human readable string. So, okay, I was wrong about it being human readable. Current timestamp. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. What does that do? Does that do anything cool? No. Maybe it's, oh, maybe it's a new date. Okay. Now what don't you like? Okay. Okay, I get you. We'll stop doing that. To ISO string, sure. We'll see if we can convert it to something a little less disagreeable. There we go. Okay, that's human-ish, readable-ish. If I hit refresh, you can see it ticks ahead with the clock. And the problem here is that if for some reason this music playlist needs to be redrawn to the screen, it's not going to remember what date it had. So, you know, I could put the date up here like let is a way of declaring a variable, but it only declares it in the local scope. So as soon as it hits an end tag like this, it will no longer be defined. I can even make this a constant. But you might, I don't know how familiar you are with functions. You might recognize that this music playlist thing I've got here is actually a function. I'm declaring a variable, calling it music playlist. I'm setting it equal to this arrow function, where it takes nothing, no arguments, and then it does what's inside of here. You can tell it's a function as well because I've got a return statement here. And that's one thing about these React components. They're designed to be functions that return what you want to render onto the screen. But if for some reason later we need to call this music playlist again to redraw it, like let's say my list of tracks have changed, I'm going to have to redraw this music playlist. When it comes back through here, it's going to grab a new date because it doesn't remember the last time it called this music playlist function, and it'll update. It'll be a new date. Let's say I don't want that in this case. Maybe for some reason what I want is what time you first opened the page. What I have to do then is use state. So I'm going to just call use state first and then explain how it works. First of all, you can see it doesn't know what use state is. I'm going to have to import it. This is a function that comes with React. Yep. Now I have access to use state, and I can call it. What I want is something to hold on to a date. I'll put that in here. So this is saying I want to create an object that is going to still be stored for long-term usage. Its default value will be this thing. I want to call it date, and if I need to change its value later, you'll have to call the setDate function. So I could, down here, immediately call setDate and do other things with it. But that's not what I want in this particular scenario, so now this should still work exactly the same. I can't exactly show you the way things are, how this is working. Like, let me see. How could I easily demonstrate? Why don't I put a click handler on the date string itself? That sounds like a great idea. So let's say we want music playlist to update when you click it. Actually, even better, why don't we just say that like we actually do want the date to change, but only when you click on the date. Aha, I like this. On click. So we're gonna say when the list item is clicked, we want to set date. And we're just gonna shove this in here. Nah, it doesn't work. Is it not working? Really? Why doesn't it like this? Does this give me a warning? No. Well, now I'm super curious. Now, why doesn't it like that? Well, let's try moving up. Let's make a separate function out here. We'll say update date is a function. It takes no arguments, and the instructions go inside of here. The only instruction we have is set the date to a new date and convert it to a nicer looking string. And on click, we'll call update date. Ah, I don't know why that wasn't as nice. Okay, yeah, now every time I click it, it updates. Yeah, every time I click on it, it's updating. So let's flip this around. Maybe I want to keep the date, but I want to also increment a counter when I click. So let's say I've got a thing called a counter, and it starts at 0. And instead of updating date, let's update counter. And we'll add 1 to counter every time we call update counter. And we still want to put date in there. We'll say site page opened at this time, and counter clicked I'm using what's called string interpolation to kind of write this in a way that looks like a normal sentence instead of having to like do a bunch of string concatenation. If I look back, yeah, here, now when I click, it's incrementing this counter here. So what's happening internally when I'm clicking this, it's calling this update counter function, which is in turn calling the set counter function, which is in turn updating the value of this state object here. And anytime you update the value of a state object inside of a component, React will then know, aha, I've got to redraw this. So it will re-execute this whole function. When it comes back down here, it'll call use state, and it'll be like, oh yeah, I remember this. This had a counter in it. Aha, I remember this. This had a date in it. So it'll retrieve the same data it had before. But remember, this time the counter has been increased by 1 since the last time it drew. So when it comes down here to return the value, it'll give you the same data it had before, but now the counter whose value has been increased by 1. So that's how state works. This is super important to how React works. If you don't understand this, you're going to want to try to figure out, like, make it make sense to you before you go much further, because, yeah, it's absolutely vital. I also want to kind of point out this grammar here for useState. useState is a function that returns an array, and the array has 2 items in it. And what we can do is we can name the items that we get out of the array using this pattern, which is called array deconstructing. or array destructuring. Array destructuring. So we want to name the first element in the array. This passes back counter, and the second element in the array to a thing called set counter. useState always returns the object, the state object itself, and then a reference to a function to update the value of that state object. So, with all that out of the way, I want to go back to where I was a little while ago. Let's. Oh boy. Let's start talking about getting data from server. Because at this point, I've just been kind of introducing concepts. I haven't really made any permanent use of them. I want to go back to drawing a list of items, but first I'm going to need to get the playlist from somewhere. So I think what I can use is the fetch function. Fetch allows you to ask for data from a particular URL and then do something with it. Let me go ahead and look up fetch because I want to remind myself how it works. It looks like you can just give it the location of a file, and it'll give you what you are asking for, if it can find it. So where do I want to keep this pl.json? Let me see. Let me first do some debugging. I don't actually know off the top of my head where I want this to be, so I'm going to refresh the screen and see where it's getting all these images from. Boy, that's a really nasty looking URL. That's not helping me out at all. Well, I was kind of hoping to avoid doing this, but what I think I'm going to have to do is make a simple web server. Yeah. I could try hosting this file somewhere else for now. I think it actually is hosted. If I go to here. Of course, this is the one that doesn't have my edits on it. And I'll have to deal with cross-origin stuff, if that means anything to you. I also want to see if it will tell me where it gets the index file from if I refresh this. It gets it from localhost. This is the HTML file, I believe. So I think maybe I can get other files out of localhost, out of that public folder. I think that public folder is accessible. It is. Okay. this is easier for now. I'm going to take this file. I'm going to put it in here. This file, this folder, this public folder is all the files that are kind of like sitting in the web server. So rather being a part of the source of the JavaScript and being assumed to be a part of the client files, it's going to be in this public folder, which is assumed to be a part of the web server. I'll have to make a request to get this data from the website, which is a good, this is where I want to start from. So let's do that now. Fetch, and the name of the file is going to be pl.json. It should know, because I didn't include any slashes or colons or whatever, that it's going to be getting it from the same URL that I'm already at. Then I want to do something with it. So what fetch does is it starts an asynchronous task. That basically means that it will start requesting data, and then it will move down to the return here. It won't finish getting this data before it moves on, which is problem number one, because that means it's going to return a playlist with nothing in it. I think that's fine. We can let it load. If you've been to any modern website, you'll know that it'll draw the empty shell of the website first, and it'll say loading, or there'll be some kind of spinning animation that lets you know that it's currently getting data from the server. That's effectively what I'm doing here. I'm going to let the list load empty, and then I'll fill that list as soon as I get the data from server. So let's do that. Fetch is a function that returns a promise. A promise means it's doing an asynchronous function, and it's intending to complete that. But what we can do with promises is we can use the then function, and whatever we put inside the parentheses here, we want to put a function here. Whatever function we put in here will be executed as soon as it's done getting pl.json. So I'm actually going to follow the example that was shown on the website that I just closed. No, it's right here. Right here. Using fetch. Example, it gets a JSON file. Then it turns that response into an object. When it comes in as a string. That's how all these JSON files are going to be communicated through the API, through the web server, the request and response structure. That's just part of how HTTP works. But then I want to turn it into an object. By saying response.json, it's saying this is a JSON object. You can turn it into normal JavaScript objects. I'll show you what that means in a moment. Actually, I'll even grab this whole thing. We'll have it log the object out to console. Yep. If I refresh the page, you can see it's loading this thing, this pl.json file, and it's putting it all the data that I just grabbed into the console window here. But that's not what we really want to happen. It's actually doing it twice, which is interesting. Now, why would that be? I don't actually care about this logo thing. I'm going to get rid of this logo problem real quick. Goodbye. If I reload it, Ha, no more thing yelling at me about the manifest logo. Anyway, it's logging this thing out twice, which I find interesting, so I'm going to debug the code. I want to find out why that's happening. It's opened up a bunch of things. So by the way, if you didn't know, to get into this developer tools, you can hit F12 on your keyboard. Ordinarily, it's going to kind of nest it, dock it to the side of your browser, but you can come into this three-dot menu and select undock, and then you can have it as a separate window, which I prefer. Anyway, I want to look at this app.js file. I want to look at our fetch statement. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, so we'll pause execution when this line is encountered. So it hits it once, I'm going to hit go, it hits it twice. That's very interesting. Why does it hit it the second time? I'm going to full screen, and I'm going to look at this call stack. This is going to be really hard to follow. And it's just an unfortunate aspect of working with React. If you use their tools, supposedly, it gets easier to read. I don't use their tools because I find them to be kind of opaque. I'm gonna let the script continue to completion. We can come in here into the components screen if you wanted to see all the stuff that's on the screen. You can use this profiler to see when things are happening. Actually, gonna click this and see if that sheds any light. Okay. So here's a timeline of events. When I clicked this, it reloaded the page, and then it started watching to see what React components were getting drawn. So it drew this music player section. That's the thing that at the top of the screen with all the buttons. It drew them very quickly. And then it started drawing this music playlist. And when it started drawing the music playlist, it made a request. I think maybe I didn't wait long enough for the recording to complete. So I'm going to click this again. I'm going to wait for like 10 seconds. I'm going to stop. Oh, I guess that was long enough. And it shows that it rendered once. It drew it one time. So why did this line of code inside of app.js get executed twice? I don't actually know. That's very fascinating to me. I'm gonna have to discover what's going on here. But yeah, this is like I said, this is kind of an unfortunate side effect of working with React, that it can be very difficult to understand what is actually happening. Yeah, this isn't telling me anything. Is it drawing app twice? Let's put a breakpoint here and refresh the screen. It draws app, and it draws app again. It's very interesting. Is it calling this line of code twice? One? No. How about here? One. Can I not put one right there? This space is fine. This is shorthand for I don't want to type out the closing tag as well, so it just is like a tag that's open and closed all in one. I could have done that in here with all of these. In fact, you know, it'd be nicer to look at if I did, right? This should function identically. And I can only do this because I don't have anything in between these two tags, right? If I had something to put in between them, I'd need to split the start and the finish into two tags. No, there's nothing I need to put in the app here. I wonder if this is some kind of side effect of it being in a development environment. Maybe not, though. Well, it's not that important, to be honest, that this is rendering twice. This does kind of demonstrate my point somewhat. What I want is to draw a list of tracks. Remember, that's where we were starting from at the beginning. I want a list of tracks. And I want to map each item in the track. No, don't text the track list. Just a thing called tracks. Map each item in that list to Thank you. That's good to know. If I remember correctly, we were putting title in here. If you recall, though, tracks isn't coming from anywhere. I don't have a tracks object, so why don't I put tracks object in like as a state object? So we're gonna use state like I was doing before. It's all coming back. We'll say we have a constant thing called tracks. And remember, these tracks gives us an array of objects. First thing is the state itself, and then there's a setter, set tracks, and then we have to put a default value inside of use state. Tracks is an array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say there's a default value of an empty array. That way when it comes down to here, map gets called on an empty array, and so it has no tracks to map, and nothing happens. So if I didn't have this here, this would crash. You can see it's cannot read property map of undefined in big red letters up here. I'm just going to get rid of this so it can tell me right here. Cannot read property map of undefined. It's because tracks is undefined. It doesn't have a value. So I'll give it a value of an empty array. There we go. It works. But I still don't have my tracks displaying. What I want to do now is take the data I got back from server, instead of logging it to the console, we'll call set tracks. Oops, and pass the data we got from server in. So now it's going to replace the array that I had in here with a new array that came from the JSON file. Tracks.map is not a function. Oh, really? Okay, let's see what our data object looks like then. Oh, I think it's data.tracks. I remember. I bet that works. Yeah. Because you remember when I was looking at the pl.json, the data starts at, is an object. And this thing called tracks inside of it is the array. So data is an object, and the array is this thing called tracks inside of it. There we go. This is what I wanted the whole time. Oops. Now this list of songs is coming from server. And displaying in a list. There's more I want to do with it, like add, the artist in the front. So I could do that, like, I think I called it creator. I'm gonna say this is using string interpolation. The first thing is a track creator, and then a space and a dash, and then the track title. So now if I come back here, yep, that worked for some of them. Really? Why is this being so slow? There we go. Took a little bit to respond, but there we go. Armor songs are all in a row. Celeste songs are all in a row. Chrono Trigger songs are all in a row. This list is starting to look a little bit like this music site. I still have to add color and stuff, but I think you get the idea. Boy, it's been like an hour already. Well, I didn't get to interactions, but I did go over how to get data from server. This is still coming from a flat list, but this flat list can be assumed to be a thing that the server manages. If I were running a piece of software for my web server, then I could have it respond to this request with anything I wanted, rather than just being a static file. I could construct a response using code, which is what I intend to do eventually. It will get a request for a playlist, and then it will in turn go talk to a database, get the results from the database, construct that into a playlist object, and then pass that back to the website that was asking for it. In the meantime, to kind of give an idea of what I'm talking about, I guess I could open up my MusicBot site where I do a similar thing. This is not the site. This is the site. So this is JavaScript that runs on a server. This is kind of what I'm going to go for. It starts a web server, and then it starts listening for requests at certain addresses. So if a request is made to website/songs, then it will go to a SQL Server to get songs, and then it will return the data back to the client. I can actually show this working. I have a separate version of this website. For that, I'm going to have to stop my React app, so it's no longer working at the moment. And I'm going to go into my Woz MusicBot folder, and I'm going to run a command node index.js. This is saying run this JavaScript file called index.js, which is this one that I was looking at. It's opened up a web server on port 3000. So let me go to localhost port 3000. We can see basically the same music site I had before, but it's being hosted through this Node.js server. And if I go to /songs, there's my song data, which this time came through a database. So eventually I'm going to want to use this. I might even just take the React application that I've been working with on this recording and use it as my website, like my client side for my front end, and have it connect to this existing server that I was already writing. So, Richard, do you have any questions? That's fair. Yeah, and I think that as far as the stuff that I did in the music site goes, you know, it wasn't a whole lot, but it really was a lot of ideas thrown out at once. I think the only changes I really made were this line here and these lines here. I don't think I did anything else in this file. Well, I changed these, but yeah. I added this line up here. I can actually see all the lines that I changed if I have a tool. I use Git. Are you familiar with Git or GitHub? We aren't. I'm using it to make sure that my changes don't end up getting destroyed between recording sessions. So I'm just going to do this, and you don't have to worry about what I'm doing here. But it does let me see what things have changed from one session to the next. So I added this line to use state. I changed these lines so that they were not just a opening closing tag, but a single tag, and then yeah, down here in the music playlist area, I removed the temporary label and replaced it with a list of tracks coming from the server. And I added a couple CSS rules. But that's it. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. That was a lot of time to spend. I felt kind of bad about spending all the time humming and hawing. There was some stuff happening that I didn't expect. Thank you, Richard, for pointing out that in the debug environment that the app is rendered twice to catch any weird issues that might happen if for some reason rendering it twice yielded different results. That would be something a developer would want to know about. So that's why I was hitting that breakpoint twice in a row. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'm sure people will have questions if they watch this, so that's all I got. See you next time.